Welcome to today's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hagley, and this is the show where we break down what it takes to build elite strength, conditioning, and athleticism for the everyday athlete. Today's episode, we're talking about structure, and more specifically, how to structure your entire training year in a way that works for you. We're breaking down an annual periodization plan that I use in all of my programs. I call it Training with the Seasons, and you'll learn how to rotate your training focus throughout the year to keep building strength, conditioning, and muscle without burning out or falling off track whenever life inevitably gets messy. We'll cover big picture strategy, how to train differently in each season, and how to program your conditioning and continue making progress even when you're sick, traveling, or just slammed with life. If you've ever found yourself stuck, spinning your wheels, burning out, or jumping from program to program, this episode is going to give you the long-term fix. Let's get into it. So to kick us off, I want to talk about periodization. I want to take a step back and kind of discuss periodization briefly and just kind of highlight what periodization is, for those that may not be familiar with that term, right? So we've probably all heard of it, right? We're periodizing training, right? There's different seasons, different phases that we're training for. And ultimately what it comes down to is it's just a way for you to plan your training across time to build towards your goals. It allows you to manage your fatigue. It allows you to avoid plateaus or burnouts, but then also to peak, for certain events or be able to kind of focus on these specific goals at a specific time or specific phase. This is how I train athletes that I'm working with that are like legit, field-based athletes or individual athletes. And this is how strength coaches in every single, NFL, team, organization, every Major League Baseball organization, Olympic athletes are training this way, right? That's, we're taking kind of the principles of that, but then we're bringing it down to the busy adults that I also predominantly write my training programs for. Now, there are different models that we have whenever we're discussing periodization. The ones that I tend to enjoy and use the most are the conjugate method, because conjugate kind of allows you to change things intra-session, right? So in between each session, you're never training for one goal in a week. Backtrack a little bit to the more general linear periodization. It works great, especially if you're working with like high school athletes, even college athletes that don't have 15, 20 years of training experience. Linear works, phenomenal for those athletes because, it allows you to build on the previous phase. So generally, right, you'll start with more of this hypertrophy building muscle phase. Then we'll add the strength. So we're going to use that muscle. We're going to get stronger now. And then we ultimately peak with power and speed and those types of things for a season. That's in more of a linear fashion. Now, that doesn't always work for the everyday athlete because we go on trips, we go on vacations, we miss training sessions here and there. There's things that come up. And if you're not hitting those sessions the way that you're programmed to hit them, you're not going to see results ultimately long term because you're going to have potentially missed, a major percentage of the total number of lifts that you were supposed to hit within that phase. And then the last one is undulating, right? So this is where we kind of undulate and modulate the intensities and the volumes to allow us to increase kind of our volume load over the course of, the training block that we're training for. Now, you don't need to marry a specific method whenever I'm talking about training for the everyday athlete, right? So what matters is that you just shift your focus across the year to build new qualities off of previous ones without, kind of continually spinning your wheels with different random training programs, random workouts, and that type of thing. So now that we've kind of talked and discussed periodization a little bit, I'm going to share my framework, and this is not my idea. This was, I honestly don't know who I've seen this through, but I've seen it through several other strength coaches that I kind of follow within the field. And I like it. I really think that it's a great way to structure the year. And so this is how I've kind of taken their framework, and this is how I kind of think about it. And this is how I've structured my year for the past 5 or 6 years, ultimately. And it may not have always been the same, timing and same kind of phases and goals, but ultimately, like, I've kind of structured my year. And honestly, it makes sense, right? I mean, whenever we're talking about this, you'll see what I mean. But it just makes sense to change your training up and kind of explore different phases of fitness, different elements and domains, and kind of get to where you need to be, in the long term. So, I'm going to kick it off in the winter, right? We're talking about New Year. Maybe even a little bit earlier than that. But the goal here in this winter phase is to build a nice solid foundation. All right. This is rebuilding from the previous phase. If you've kind of been following this framework, it might be building up as kind of like a bridge cycle to get you into this annual phase. But basically here we're talking about base strength, building just raw strength, getting strong, getting tissue, quality to be high, getting joints to be able to move well. So mobility also plays a huge part here. And then I'm always going to talk about conditioning. And so here we're trying to build that aerobic engine. This is where we can hammer 3 or 4 sessions, of fairly heavy lifting in the gym. And then we can also do several sessions, 2 to 3 sessions, at least a week of more of that low intensity aerobic work on a treadmill, on a bike, right? So reason that this works so well is, one, it's cold, we don't want to get outside yet. It's usually chilly outside, and doing stuff that's outdoors, we're not really working on house projects outside yet, right? We might be working on some stuff inside, but we're not mowing the lawn yet. We're not, building decks. We're not doing all this type of stuff. The holidays at this point are generally over, so we don't have to worry about the Thanksgiving, travel and the Christmas travel, right? The food that comes with that. And then that ultimately leads to fewer distractions. There's just less stuff going on. Most people at this point in time, we always talk about New Year's resolutions, that like I'm ready to kind of kickstart and get started with my fitness journey. This is why this is the perfect time to do that. Now here, this is where we're thinking like higher repetitions. We're building base strength. We're not max strength here, but we're building with higher repetitions. We're doing a lot of unilateral work with the legs, with the arms. We're doing a lot of aerobic base building conditioning. And then we're trying to strengthen, our core and our trunk. Just general fitness, right? This is stuff that's going to build into the rest of the year, but that's your typical, almost like bodybuilder style lifting at this point. Now, things start to warm up, right? We get into May, we get into April. It's springtime now. Flowers are outside. This is where I like to program the performance phase. This is where it shifts from base strength now to more raw strength, raw power, building that athleticism. We can kind of get outside a little bit, do some stuff in the driveway, do some stuff in the, in the parking lot at the gym. Right. This is where motivation starts to pick up because days are longer. The sun is out. We just feel better. Whenever it's springtime, that's my favorite season of the year is spring because I'm getting outside now, and so as those days get longer, right, here's how we can start to dial in some of the lower rep lifts. We can start to incorporate more jumps and more sprints, med ball throws, building that raw power during this type of phase. It's also another great time on the conditioning side that we can add that high intensity stuff. We can start to add more intervals. We can get outside and be running, repeats and intervals and things along those lines that build that intensity to a kind of a greater degree with the conditioning system. And then we're just sharpening up our top end strength. So this would almost be kind of like that first mini peak, if you would, where like we're feeling good coming out of the winter. We're getting faster. We're getting more strength. We're probably losing a little bit of weight at this point because now we've got some muscle. Now we're working a little bit harder with our conditioning. And so we're getting ready for summer. Now that leads us into summer, right? Summer is all about physique and ultimately, like if you're more of an athlete, like a hybrid athlete, there's probably some type of a race or event that you're working towards. So those kind of go hand in hand. Where, physique wise, we want to look good. We want to go to the beach. We want to go to the public pool. We want to have, kind of be able to take our shirt off and not be, feeling uncomfortable that way. And so, this is where like more of that conditioning takes an even deeper dive. And then also if we're looking to compete in some type of a race, this is probably the season that it's going to happen. So we're going to kind of structure our training around focusing on that one kind of key event, whether it be a run, a triathlon, a swim, whatever you may do, maybe even like a hybrid Hyrox CrossFit workout, something along those lines. This is when that phase allows you to kind of focus on that. So obviously here volume is going to start to increase a bit. We're going to start to kind of get some more hypertrophy work if we're focusing on the physique. So we're building muscle, and then also circuits and supersets are going to be what builds that conditioning. We can obviously do a lot of outdoor workouts, outdoor runs. If you are at a gym where you've got the garage door, like open that bad boy up. If you've got a home gym and you can drag your stuff out to the driveway, I love doing that stuff. I work out, at least 2 or 3 times a week in the spring and summer and ultimately early fall, outside in the driveway because I want to get some sun. I want to feel good, right? I do a lot of long rucks. This afternoon, once I get off this podcast, I'm going to go out for probably an hour and 20-minute ruck, just because that's my conditioning for today. So you kind of name it. You can build, some of that stuff in with the season and just take advantage of what's been given to you. And then the last phase, right? We're in the last season of the year. Now we're building into fall. So now we're coming down off our peak. We're coming down off of our competitive phase where if we had an event or we had a race or, summer's over, now we can start to build a little bit more, of more body weight, right? We can eat a little bit more. Holidays are going to be coming up soon. So we're going to be naturally eating more. So let's take advantage of that, right? Let's focus our work on kind of building some muscle, but then also just recalibrating and just kind of getting back into this, ramp down phase where, life is starting to get busy. The kids are back in school. Work a lot of times ramps up coming out of the summer. So dial things back. Start to focus more on your joint health, the tissue quality, how you're moving, how you're feeling. And then ultimately here, this is where we can start to fix weak links. So if there's things in your fitness that you don't necessarily, maybe in the past 8 to 12 months, you haven't, you've noticed that that's lacking. This may be a time to get it. For a lot of folks, it's probably going to be your aerobic conditioning. And so guess what? We're going to do a lot within these phases. So here's where I'm usually stretching up to 4 days a week of aerobic, that zone 2, zone 1 type training where we're just building the base. We're getting miles, we're getting hours in to kind of get our body ready so that we can recover better as the next year comes around. The idea with this whole layout is that we're evolving our training throughout the year. And this is how I train. I've done this. I don't go hard year round. I rotate my goals and I shift my intensity and kind of structure it, around my life. If there's events in the summer that I've got to kind of work around, if I'm, in the summer, I usually have 3 or 4 trips that I'm going on for weeks for a week at a time. It throws a huge wrench into my program. Now, I'm fortunate that I know about them well in advance, so I can structure my training to where that's a deload week, right? I may not have access to a gym, or even if I do, I'm not probably going to have a barbell and a rack. I'm not going to have a skier. So, I'll do a lot more walking and more deload, destructured type stuff during those weeks. But the 3 weeks before that trip, guess what? Week 3, I'm going hard, right? So that's really how I've kind of structured my own training, and it's worked, like I said, really well for the last 4 or 5 years. So now kind of what I want to get to is focusing more on the conditioning, because I think that conditioning can play a huge role here. We can use the conjugate method almost year round, not really make many tweaks. We might go to more of a full body split. We might go to 4 days a week, 3 days a week, whatever it may be with the strength. For the most part, it's going to stay about the same. But conditioning is where we can really make some massive, kind of visible changes to how that program might look. So, and that's why I think it deserves its own spotlight. Now, at no point throughout the year are we just dropping the cardio off, right? Conditioning is threaded into the program year round. So conditioning for the aerobic system, this is that zone 2. We're always going to hit it a minimum of 2 to 3 times a week. Always. That's never going to leave. That's staying in the program. And zone 2 does not have to be spending an hour on the bike. It doesn't have to be, spending an hour on the rower or the skier. We can go for walks and things like that. But we're trying to get our heart rate within that 135 to 145 beats per minute. If you're a little bit older, it might be a little bit, less than that. But that's ultimately where we're trying to get for at least 2 to 3 times a week, at least 30 minutes a session, maybe 45, maybe up to an hour. Now, we're also going to build in some long efforts into this, especially during phases where we can get outside. So if you enjoy riding your bike, get outside on the weekends and hit out a 60 to 75 minute workout. You may even go 90 minutes, right? This is where we can really kind of build that engine, and doing that in the winter time, it's dark outside, kids are asleep, just get into the gym and go ride the bike for an hour, right? Toss on a movie and just sit there and run that. So inside, right, we can use different modalities. So in the winter, we're looking more bike, skiers, rowers, maybe if you've got a treadmill, walking on an inclined treadmill. And then in the spring and summer, let's go ahead and get outside. Let's go for a ruck. Let's go find a park that we can walk around. Or let's go hike or cycle outdoors. So just different ways to break it up. Now, flipping gears over into that anaerobic conditioning. This is where we're going to hit sprints and intervals and that high output work, but we're not going to do this every week. Okay. Especially in the wintertime, we're going to focus on aerobic conditioning. And then as we start to get more into the summer, as we can get outside, this is a really good time to start implementing this stuff. And really, we're going to probably do it for about 4 weeks at a time, take 4 weeks off, 4 weeks at a time. We might stretch that a little bit, but that's ultimately, kind of how I try to build that in. So to start, we're going to do short, hard bursts, 10 to 20 seconds, 10 to 60 seconds, something along those lines. And we're going to push that, like I said, more in the spring and the summer. We can do it by running. So if you're a hybrid athlete and doing one of my hybrid athlete programs, you're going to do, a decent amount of runs. We're going to do tempo runs. We're going to do threshold intervals, lactate sessions on the bike, maybe even. We can do just on more my athletic based peak performance programs. That's where we might just do sprints on an air bike. We might just, kind of get out where we can kind of push that on the, we might just get out on the sled where we can push the sled for 10 meters, rest, recover, and we're really pushing that anaerobic system. So anaerobic conditioning certainly has its place. It's not year round, but it's something that we can do. And it's a lot of fun to do that in the spring and summertime. And it also works really well if you're trying to peak for a race or peak for an event, because this is where we can kind of train that anaerobic system a little bit more. And then another element to the conditioning is more of that mixed / functional conditioning. So here we're, again, sled pushes, carries, farmers carries, kettlebell carries, sandbag lifts, walks with those types of that's that strongman style work. This is a great, one for the spring and the summer as well, because we can get outside, we can do, lift some heavy stuff around and show off that strength, right? So I really enjoy kind of doing some of that stuff, especially during those seasons. But then we can also break it up into circuits, and we can do EMOMs and AMRAPs, more of that CrossFit hybrid style stuff. And this is when we kind of want to increase the intensity without really overcomplicating, our training. So throughout the year, right, we're going to cycle the type of conditioning that we're doing, but we're never going to really shut that engine off. That aerobic conditioning is always going to stay in there, kind of no matter what season, no matter what part of the year. So now to kind of wrap this up, a couple things that I really just want to touch on real quick, and how we can kind of incorporate this into our life. So planning around your life, right? Things come up. So even the perfect program, I can write you the perfect program, but all of a sudden something happens and you're not able to follow it 100%. It's going to happen. So how do we structure our training around these unknowns, right? I've already talked about it a little bit, but if I've got work travel, I'm going to adjust my program in the months, 1 month to 2 months leading up to that. But then while I'm traveling, I'll probably do some 20-minute workouts in a gym. I might just do a quick circuit, body weight circuit. If I've got access to machines, or I've got access to dumbbells or cable, I might do, something with those things, but I'm not going to be able to do my programming that I would program for myself at home. So I've got to kind of shift a little bit. Honestly, whenever I travel, I really enjoy the machines because I don't have machines in my home gym. I'm not a big machine guy. I don't think that there's anything wrong with them, but I just don't use machines very often. So if they've got machines, like I was just in a home gym, like I was just in a hotel gym last week where they had a leg press and they had hamstring curls and leg extensions and chest press. Guess what? I was building circuits with those, kind of just working in and out, doing 3 sets of 8 to 10. I maybe did some eccentrics. I wasn't trying to really hurt myself because I had to walk a lot during that time. So I need to be able to walk, but ultimately, I just kind of changed it up. It was a different stimulus to the body, and I'm not going to lose all my progress if I don't train for that 2 or 3 days. But that's ultimately kind of how I would kind of structure that if I've got access to it. So use the hotel gyms. If you don't have a hotel gym, whenever I go on vacation here in a couple months, I'm taking resistance bands with me, and I'm going to do some bicep curls, and I'm going to do some band pull aparts, and just little things. And then I'm also just going to basically stop lifting for that 5 to 7 days. I'm going to do a lot more walking. I'll probably walk in the morning, and I'll probably walk in the afternoon. I might even do a walk in the evening after dinner, right? I'm going to still get some movement in, but it's not going to be my normal structured workouts. Second up here is family chaos, right? There's a lot that happens. If you've got kids, like, what I'm talking about. If you've got, significant others, if you're single, it's a little bit easier. But if you've got, a family that you're kind of with, more constantly, you're going to have to make some changes because things are going to come up. Your kid gets sick, right? Or they don't want to sleep, or they slept too long, or, whatever it might be. So maybe we have to change our training. And so we always kind of evaluate, especially with my one-on-one clients, we evaluate how that session is going, how those programs are looking. And if this is one of those things that's just kind of a continual, thing that's occurring, then we're going to drop sessions. We might change it to full body 3 days a week, or we might even go down to 2. Things that happen. If it's something that that something's coming up in the afternoon because, your son or your daughter has to go to a sporting event, then you can't get your normal lift in, then maybe let's just walk in the morning for 30 minutes. Maybe we can find time there, or walk at lunch, whatever it may be. And then the last one is the big one. This is the one that it's going to be there. It's inevitable, but it's the holidays. So again, just like whenever I plan for vacation, I plan around the holidays with my programming. So like November 1st is the start of week 1 of that 4-week block. And then the end of November is a deload week. That's whenever Thanksgiving's coming up and I'm not doing much of anything that week. Same thing with Christmas. I can kind of program starting December 1st until that last week of December. And now we're just kind of coasting, deloading that final week of the year. So, change things up. But even then during that week, I'm still getting movement in. I'm doing bodyweight stuff whenever I'm traveling, during the holidays. I'm going to, probably go for a walk on a treadmill if I can find one, but just kind of take it easy. I might just do more stretching, try to get some movement, something just to keep kind of that momentum going is going to be enough ultimately. And then, the big one is don't try to make up your missed workouts. A lot of times I work with folks that think that they missed, their Tuesday session and their Wednesday session. So they're going to combine them on Thursday, right? And now we're just really pushing it back. Focus more on the pattern of your programming, not that individual session. If we're focused around this 4-week block is designed to kind of get me stronger or to get me more, power or to build my conditioning. Just focus on that. Pull out these key little elements. Make sure that we're hitting the sessions. We're not trying to skip them. But if we do, it's going to happen. Life happens. And ultimately, unless you are a pro athlete, you're going to be okay. So going back, whenever I talk with clients, whenever I work with this one-on-one, we do monthly reassessments. We're making sure that things are fitting in with the life. If there's constantly reoccurring events, then we're going to make some changes. We might even adjust things weekly. So if we know, this is how I kind of program my life. Every Sunday for about 30 minutes in the afternoon, I've got a time blocked out on my calendar that I'm going to look at my calendar for the next 7 days and just kind of see what's coming up. Do the same thing with your training. And this is actually whenever I do it with my training, but just, do that. Take that into practice. Look at your training for the next week. What are we going to do on Monday? What are we doing on Wednesday? Because that just avoids that random guess. Okay. If you're waking up in the morning on a Wednesday and you're like, I feel like hitting arms today, like we're doing something wrong. That's not going to be good for long-term progress. Yes, you might still get a workout in, but if you don't have any structure going into that, then how do you expect to really see changes when you're not planning for them? Okay, so plan ahead, make time for it. And then aim for that momentum. Try to keep the momentum going. If you've got to get some movement in, get the movement in. It doesn't have to be perfect, okay? So to kind of wrap this up, I really just want to, thank you guys for listening in today. I think that this is a great framework for programming. I've used this in all of my long-term programs. I've used this personally for my own programs, and it works really well. It combines strength conditioning. It keeps things fresh in the mind. It keeps things fresh on the body. We're getting new stimuluses, and ultimately, this is something that I think a lot more people should incorporate, especially those everyday athletes who still care about progress, who still care about how they look and how they feel. So here's the bottom line to wrap this episode up, right? So you don't need a perfect program. You just got to make sure that you plan ahead, and that, your program adjusts to your lives and to your seasons. So make sure that we're still training hard whenever it makes sense. We're backing off whenever life is kind of chaotic, but we always kind of keep that aerobic engine running and keep kind of moving forward, keep that steam going. So I appreciate you guys listening. If you want help setting this up for yourself, then go to HagleyStrength.com, check out my Train Heroic programs. There you can also, I'm going to have this up on the website. You can be able to grab my free seasonal training template. And if this episode helped you, then please share it with someone else who needs more structure in their training. I appreciate y'all listening, and I'll catch you on the next one. That's it for today's episode of the Everyday Strength Podcast. If you got value from this, do me a favor, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who would benefit. And if you want more insights, exclusive training tips, and in-depth breakdowns of the latest research in strength conditioning, join my Performance Edge newsletter. It's my free weekly email where I cut through the noise and break down what actually works in training, nutrition, and performance. Sign up today at hagleystrength.com. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you next time.